David Cameron is reportedly pledging £40 million to improve flood defences in the north. 10 million of that is going to be used to improve the Foss Barrier in York. Meanwhile, the Environment Agency has been accused of spending £12 million on weirs in the Thames next to David Cameron's constituency to help fish swim. That's despite cancelling flood defence spending schemes. We've heard a lot, haven't we, about the plan put forward to help stop flooding in Leeds in 2011, which was discarded by the government. Leeds flooded in parts over Christmas. There's been a leaked document that The Guardian have put on their front page today from the body representing all major organisations responsible for flood defences. It says ministers ignored warnings in the document that was sent to them just days before Cumbria flooded for the first time. And it says that government cuts to flood defence spending could leave almost twice as many households at, quotes, significant risk from flooding. But the best example of how government hasn't taken flood defence spending seriously enough, I think, comes from the Environment Agency themselves. They reportedly produced a map highlighting severely affected areas of Leeds that had been flooded. The map is said to run an almost identical course to the proposed HS2 route through the city. Indeed, it's reported that Phase 1 of High Speed 2 crosses more than 100 watercourses. £55.7 billion that project currently stands at. 40 million goes on flood defences. It would be an astonishing example of how badly managed this project has been if it turns out that even more parts of this route would actually be underwater if it had been built by now. You might not be surprised to hear that a petition has started to ask that funds are diverted from HS2 towards flood defences. Is this an example of just how big a white elephant HS2 is, that part of the route would be underwater right now if it had been built? Do you think that the priorities are right here, that 55 billion quid is going to be spent on this railway, which we can argue about the benefits of, and we will, whereas 40 million is being spent on the flood defence of people's homes and businesses? Of course you can do both at the same time. I'm not saying you can't, but I can't help but think that the fact that part of this route would be underwater goes to show that the government really isn't on top of flood defence schemes. Which is more important, do you think, for Britain? The spending that's going to happen on HS2 or the flood defences? Do you think funds should be diverted, given that money is being spent on this route which goes through flooded areas, that actually part of the budget for HS2 should be going towards making sure it won't be flooded when those waters rise? Let's speak to Penny Gaines, who is chair of the Stop HS2 campaign. Afternoon to you, Penny.
Good afternoon, Tom.
How much of this route would be underwater, do we know?
Oh, now that's a tricky question. As you said in your introduction, it passes over quite a number of watercourses that can get flooded. HS2 has been quite dismissive of people's fears about flooding. But we know that people are saying, well, it floods in this area. HS2 Limited are using outdated flood maps and saying, oh, no, it looks perfectly fine on their maps. But they're not taking account of the local knowledge that people have. So we could presumably find out the official HS2 figures, but they're not representative of what really is happening on the ground or at the moment.
And what is happening on the ground is that you're saying that these areas that they are putting the rails down on are not suitable to have that?
Well, to start with, they haven't actually got as far as getting the hybrid bill through Parliament. So the rails down on the ground is a
long way away for sure. But the planned route.
Yeah. I mean, the best example is if you look at Leeds, where they're trying to work out where Leeds Station should be, and the proposals that have been out in a document by David Higgins, who is the chairman of HS2 Limited itself, that's currently underwater with the flooding in Leeds. So it's one of these. It's a real issue on the route itself.
And clearly, you would say that not much thought has gone into, from those people who are planning the route, into how to protect it from flooding.
Yeah, I mean it's essential. If you drop a brick into the cistern of a toilet or something like that, the water level rises. So when they're building HS2, even if when it goes over various areas, they've got to put in concrete piles and things like that. That's going to make the surrounding water level rise. So it's a real issue where the flooding is and what the historic records are, what's genuinely happened, and what's likely to happen in future.
In terms of benefit, then, how much is it going to benefit financially the North and the South from spending £55.7 billion on this project, Penny?
Yeah, I mean, the current BCR benefit cost ratio is about 1.5, which means that for every pound spent on HS2, the government say that you'll get a benefit of about £1.50 back. Now, if you compare that to HS1, the actual benefits they got back was about 60p for every pound spent on it. That's the latest government figures. When you compare it to flood defence spending, the government is saying you have to have £8 benefit for every pound spent on flood defences for them to be worth doing. So there's a real sort of contrast between the spending on HS2, the levels of benefit that are expected to come back from HS2, to the amount of spending there is on flood defences, or that's been announced on flood defences, and the benefits that are due back from that spending on flood defences.
Do you think that there are going to be more calls from people whose houses are on or near the route, worried particularly on this issue of flooding caused by this route going near their homes, going near areas which do flood regularly?
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the concerns that people have, because they can see what's happening. But it's not just a case of for people who are directly affected by HS2 who live near the route or on the route. It's a case of the priorities of spending. We know that floods happen. We can see the pictures of Leeds, of York, of the areas in the Lake District. We know that the flooding is happening. We know we've got to do something about it, or let people's homes and businesses go underwater. I mean, it is a genuine issue. HS2 is just worrying about something that the government is saying, well, we have to be able to get round the country faster. But there's already good railway lines between London and Birmingham, which is the first bit that's going to be the bit that's under going through Parliament at the moment and won't be open till 2026 if it goes ahead on time. The bit further north is even later, in going to happen even later. And they're just saying, well, we think it will help people in the north to build the railway. But what those people are seeing now is they're seeing that they are genuinely being affected by flooding that's happening at the moment, and flooding that's likely to happen again and again in future.
Penny, great to talk to you. Penny Gaines, chair of the Stop HS2 campaign. Sandra Tim says, I find it unbelievable that a so-called high-speed train that will make a difference of 20 minutes and costs a fortune is even on the agenda. It should be cancelled and the money put into flood defences around all the country. This should be the priority. It's a national disgrace that it was allowed to happen. The lack of foresight, she says, from our government is very concerning. Let's speak to Pauline in Watford. Hi, Pauline.
I couldn't agree more. Hello.
Hi.
Happy barely New Year.
Happy just New Year.
I couldn't agree more with that email if I tried. I mean, this is a total dereliction of duty. We're told we are the 5th richest country in the world. And there was a Pitt report that was it from 2011, 12 or 13, that said what is required with reference to flood defences. In my view, HS2 is not anything but a vanity project, because it's not taking away hours from people's journey, it's taking away minutes. And I think that the people who have suffered since the Pitt report was not fully implemented have the right, in my view, to claim human rights violation.
Really?
And full compensation for any losses that they've suffered.
Do you not see any economic benefits, Pauline? Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about the time difference, but the reason it was initially proposed was not to make the journeys quicker. It was to allow more journeys to be made on a faster speed line that would allow greater trade and greater commerce and all the rest of it. Well,
in my view, what this country requires is flood defences in a climate change. Look how many billions it's going to cost to put things to right now. And if climate change, which all of the countries in the world are getting together to say climate change is occurring, and Holland has approached it right and have prevented their albeit reclaimed land, but reclaimed land is a parallel in my mind to building on floodplains. And if this country, the so-called fifth richest country does not do something about that, I think it's a false economy, because whatever economic value they're going to gain, if any, by putting HS2, which will be partly flooded every year that there's a flood, it just doesn't make sense to me. But then, of course, what do I know? I'm just an ordinary OAP.
Well, why do you suspect, Pauline, as the self-proclaimed ordinary voter, why do you think the government seems so reticent to put money into flood defences? It does seem like it takes a crisis for people to act.
Well, in my view, the various projects that they seem to be bent on going forward for is going to benefit somebody or some companies in terms of money. And therefore, in my view, I would like to see where the money is going to go in terms of who is going to gain what. Not the country, but the individuals, the companies.
And so this might be done with friends of friends behind it who would help, right? That's your assessment of it. There's lots of cynicism about HS2, Pauline, it's fair to say. Robert's in Medway. Hi, Robert.
Hello.
Afternoon, sir.
I'm also against HS2, but that's for a slightly different reason.
Go on, tell me why.
Why I think it's a huge investment into something which, frankly, all over the country, we've seen the move more to privatisation. And so therefore, if a private company wants to build a railway and sees the sense into it, then let them, not have massive infrastructure investment when they won't use that same infrastructure investment into engineering, into flood defences.
So it's wrong to put public money into this, is what you're saying?
I think it's a waste of money.
Even if there could be something retrieved from that public investment?
I don't think the benefits will be hugely outweigh when the technology is moving forward at such an advanced stage that I don't believe trains, which there will be people that that think trains are the future. I think there's going to be driverless cars, which will remove the need for trains completely, and we need more straight motorways to use. So HS2, I think, is a vanity project that just doesn't work when we need to be securing our borders in more than just one way.
Well, yes, and particularly, and we raised this issue of floods, which doesn't seem to be a particularly, and I hate to use this phrase, but it doesn't seem to be a particularly sexy issue for politicians, because it's not easy to get a soundbite from it, and it's something that can be spent on in the future, and it's very hard to show those homes that have been saved by flooding, rather than actually make it a lot easier to show those homes that have been flooded as a result of not spending the money. So people do seem reticent to put money into these kind of things, whereas you say they're happy to put money into something that you believe isn't actually going to benefit anyone because the technology is going to go faster than the train building will.
Yes.
Robert, thank you for your call. 0345 6060 973. Do you think that HS2, albeit a lofty idea to allow people to move around more freely, to allow better trade between the north and the south, to bridge that apparent north-south divide, whether that exists or not, as much as it is a good idea, in practice it looks sillier and sillier, particularly on this report that it may well have been flooded around Leeds as a result of the lack of spending on flood defences? Do you think the government have got its priorities right here in attempting to build a northern powerhouse? If you live in the north, which is more important to you? Flood defence spending or HS2? I'd have thought for those of you having to sweep out your homes once again, you could tell me that answer pretty darn quickly. In fact, I barely need to ask the question. 0345 6060 973. Francis Cutler has been in touch on Twitter. Afternoon to you, Francis. They say using current HS1 fares as a guideline, haven't talked about ticket prices yet, have we? An HS2 season ticket is likely to cost, no way, £12,500 from Birmingham to London, over 50% of taxed average income. £12,500 a season ticket on HS2. Birmingham to London. That is, well, HS1, I have to say, I don't use it all that often, but when I do use it, it is noticeable just how expensive a ticket is on that. To have HS2 come in at this level of expense, causing this many problems to so many people who live on the proposed route, and at a cost, if that is correct, Francis, of £12,500 for a season ticket from Birmingham to London, almost doesn't seem worth buying, does it? I mean, who's going to be able to afford that? The only people you're going to be able to get using it are those people who have their businesses pay their season tickets. It's only going to be a useful transport, mode of transport for those people who work in big companies who are able to have their tickets paid for them. Is someone going to come on and defend HS2? Is someone going to come on and say, actually, this is a good bit of infrastructure that we need? We keep being told by the government that we need it, despite the soaring costs, and that people in the north, south, east and west are going to benefit from it, despite the huge cost and despite the problems it is going to cause. Is anyone out there going to be brave enough to do that? Because I wonder at the moment whether or not people are exposing what might be considered a bit of a white elephant. The money being poured into flood defence spending is now going to be £40 million, says David Cameron. The HS2 project currently stands at £55.7 billion. Priorities?
LBC.
It does seem that £12,500 may well be the price of a season ticket on HS2 from Birmingham to London. If so, there are going to be very, very few people who are able to afford that, I would suggest. Steve is in Aberdeen.
I think this HS2 is a complete and utter joke. I mean, if these figures of 55 billion are correct, to cut the journey time from London to Birmingham by an hour or whatever it is, I don't know who's come up with these figures, but to me it sounds a complete and utter con. I mean, this money should be spent on improving our roads and the rail system that we've got now. It sounds to me like some project that, you know, the government wants to get going so they can say, oh yeah, we've got a high-speed train, just like France and Germany have had for about the last 20 years. I think it's a complete and utter waste. There must be a hell of a lot of better ways of spending 55 billion than cutting the journey time to Birmingham by an hour or whatever it is. And so, yes, I think it's almost criminal, really, that they're considering doing it.
Steve, thank you for your call. Well, there is a lot of opposition, isn't there, to HS2? I have yet to find somebody who's going to call me and say what a great idea HS2 is, what a worthy sum of money is being spent on it, and that we will see a return of investment on that and a northern powerhouse built as a result of it. Nobody seemingly wants to come on and defend it. We got figures earlier from Penny Gaines, who is chair of the Stop HS2 campaign, who said you get £1.50 back for every pound you spend on HS2. You get 60p back in reality for every pound that was spent on HS1. On flood defence spending, you get £8 back for every pound spent. I'd said previously that we hadn't heard from anybody who wanted to defend it. Well, Ran's in Birmingham. Hi, Ran.
Hello there, Tom. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, sir.
I mean, I listen to this programme, and being a businessman and sort of working for local government and everything, and there is a need, and I think there is a fair sort of argument to support it, but the money that they're spending is where I kind of part ways. And this is why, you know, being a staunch sort of liberalist, sort of Labour supporter over the years, I lost faith when they started adding school fees, and I'm doing the same because the tune that I hear from Cameron, you know, we're going to invest in British, we're going to do this, and Britain. I can tell you, working in the business sector, the amount of times I've heard that and then had a foreign company come over here, take the money, do the work, charge double, triple, the councillors and all these so-called MEPs do certain favours, and then all that money is taken away and Britain is left with a white elephant, as you know, you call it or anybody else calls it. And I think for the money that we are paying as taxpayers, it is absolutely atrocious, and it's about time that this government and the governments before them started coming clean about investing in the people of this country, which is diabolical, and I can't wait to not vote for Conservatives again.
Well, do you know what, Ran? As a call that started out as being potentially supportive of HS2, that degenerated rather quickly.